Season 1, Episode 1, Part 2, The House of Wisdom. The making of Adam, clay, fire, and the refusal that changed everything. Last time, we established the ground beneath the ground. We followed Abu Ja'far al-Tabari into the deepest question a historian can ask. Not what happened, but what time is, and what it means that anything happened at all. We watched the pen inscribe the record of existence before existence had begun. We watched the throne settle upon the water. We watched 6 immense cosmic days unfold. And at the end of all that construction, at the very last hour of the last day, we arrived at the edge of the most consequential moment in Tabari's entire history. Not a battle, not a succession, not a treaty or a betrayal or a speech that changed the direction of an empire. A figure lying in the dirt, inanimate, not yet breathing, and an angel circling it, already planning what he would do if authority ever passed from him to this thing made of clay. If you are new here, this channel has been building something from the very beginning of history. Every episode connects. Hit subscribe so you are here for the next one. This history is only getting bigger from here. We need to begin with what the clay was, because Tabari does not begin with a poetic image. He begins with a question of sourcing, and the answer to that question tells us something important about Adam before Adam has done anything at all. Where did the clay come from? Tabari assembles the traditions. God sent Gabriel to the earth to take some of its soil. The earth, in the tradition that Tabari preserves from Ibn Abbas through the chain of al-Dahak, spoke. It took refuge in God against being taken, against being mutilated. And Gabriel, honoring that plea, returned without the clay. Then God sent Michael. The same thing happened. The earth called upon God, and Michael granted it sanctuary and came back empty-handed. Then God sent the angel of death. And the angel of death said something that the other 2 angels did not say. When the earth took refuge in God against him, the angel of death replied, I take refuge in God against returning without having executed his command. And he took the soil. He did not take it from one place. He took red soil and white soil and black soil. Soil from plains and soil from rocky ground, from sweet-tasting earth and bitter earth, from the fertile and the barren. He mixed it. He took it up. He moistened it. This is not incidental. Tabari's sources are explicit about the implication. The children of Adam came out different from each other, in color, in temperament, in disposition, because Adam himself was made from different kinds of earth. The diversity of humanity is not an accident. It is built into the material from which the first human being was assembled, and the soil itself resisted being taken twice, before the angel whose office is death finally carried out the command. There is something in that pattern that Tabari does not editorialize about, but which any careful reader will notice. The creation of Adam required an act that the earth experienced as a kind of wound. The taking of the soil, the mixing of what had been separate, the moistening of what had been dry, long before Adam had sinned, long before the expulsion from paradise. The very act of his creation involved a form of taking from the earth that the earth did not willingly give. The clay was moistened. It was left to become what the Quran calls Salsal, dry clay, the kind that makes a sound when struck, like potter's clay, resonant and hollow. But before it became that, it passed through the stage the Quran calls Hawwa, stinking slime, the clay that had been wet long enough to begin to change, to smell, to become something between a solid and a dissolution. From compact soil, to wet clay, to stinking slime, to resonant dry clay, the body of Adam passed through 4 states of matter before God was ready to breathe into it. And while it lay there, inanimate, hollow, already formed into the shape of a human being but not yet a human being, Iblis came to look at it. The tradition Tabari preserves from Ibn Abbas through Abu Rawq and al-Dahak is one of the most vivid in the entire first volume of the history. Iblis came to the body of clay that would become Adam and kicked it with his foot. The body made a sound, the hollow resonant sound of dry clay. And Iblis said, You are not something for making sounds. What were you created for? Then he entered through Adam's mouth and exited through his posterior. He entered through the posterior and exited through the mouth. And he said, If I am given authority over you, I will ruin you. And if you are given authority over me, I will disobey you. Read that moment carefully, because Tabari is showing us something about the nature of the being who will become the primary antagonist of human history. Iblis does not simply dislike Adam. He has already made his calculations. He has already decided what he will do in either scenario. If Adam is placed below him, ruin. If Adam is placed above him, disobedience. There is no version of Adam's existence, in Iblis's internal accounting, that ends well for Adam. This is not emotion. This is strategy. Iblis is a strategic thinker who has already run the scenarios and arrived at his position before the crisis even occurs. And God, Tabari's sources tell us, was fully aware of this. The angels were not, but God was. The body lay there, according to one tradition, for 40 years. according to another tradition, for 40 nights. The specific duration varies across the chains Tabari collects, but the image is consistent. A long wait. A body already formed, already possessing its shape, lying on the ground for a span of years while existence continued around it, while Iblis circled it, while the angels passed by it and were frightened by what they saw. One tradition says that when angels would pass the body of Adam, they would be alarmed by it and frightened, because there was nothing like it, and nothing that comes from outside the expected categories of creation is comfortable to encounter. Then God decided the time had come. He said to the angels, and the tradition Tabari considers most reliable traces, this to the authority of the Prophet himself through Abu Hurairah. He said, "When I have fashioned him and blown some of my spirit into him, fall down in prostration before him." The spirit entered Adam by way of his head. This is the detail that Tabari finds most credible across the traditions he has assembled. And as the spirit descended through his body, entering the eyes, the tongue, the chest, each part it touched became living flesh and blood, and the hollow resonance of the clay gave way to the warmth of a living creature. When the spirit reached his eyes, Adam looked, and he saw the fruits of paradise. When it reached his belly, he felt hunger, the first hunger in human history. And when the spirit reached his legs, but before it had fully pervaded his lower body, Adam jumped up. In haste, reaching for the fruit he had just seen with his newly living eyes, not yet complete, not yet capable of standing properly, reaching. The Quran says, "Man was created of haste." Tabari collects multiple interpretations of this verse, and the one he finds most persuasive, preserved through Ibn Abbas and through Mujahid, the great early Quranic commentator, is precisely this. It refers to Adam in this moment, reaching for the fruit of paradise before the spirit had even finished entering his body, before he was fully made. The first human act in history is impatience. The first impulse of the first man is to reach for what is in front of him before he is ready. And then Adam sneezed. And by divine inspiration he said, "Praise be to God." And God said to him, "May your Lord show mercy unto you." Adam was told, "Go to those angels and greet them." He went and said, "Peace be upon you." And they responded, "And upon you be peace and the mercy of God." And God said to him, "This is your greeting, and the greeting for your progeny to use among themselves." There is something in this exchange that Tabari does not pause to analyze, but that carries immense weight across the entire history he is building. The first words Adam speaks are praise. The first thing God says to Adam is a blessing, and the first social act of human history is a greeting of peace. A greeting that will be repeated, according to Islamic tradition, billions of times across 14 centuries, in every language and in every land where Muslims live. The form of it was established in the first minutes of the first human life. Then the command came. And everything broke. Prostrate yourselves before Adam. Every angel in the created order fell down. The prostration was not worship. It was honor, recognition, acknowledgement that this new creature, made from clay, had been elevated by God to a position of vicegerency, of authority, of trust. The angels complied, because they understood obedience. They had been created for it. Iblis did not comply. He stood. In the middle of the prostration of every other being, he stood. God said to him, "What prevented you from prostrating yourself before what I have created with my own hands?" And Iblis, the being who had circled the clay body for 40 years, who had already decided what he would do in either scenario, who had already calculated his position, gave his answer. "I am better than he. You created me from fire, and you created him from clay." 5 words of reasoning. 5 words that contain the entire logic of every hierarchy that has ever justified oppression. Every aristocracy that has ever claimed natural superiority. Every system of privilege that has ever insisted that origin determines worth. Iblis was not lying about his origin. He was created from fire. Adam was created from clay. The factual premise of his argument was accurate. What was wrong? What God's response made clear was catastrophically wrong, was the conclusion he drew from it. That origin determines dignity. That the nature of what you are made from determines your worth in the order of things. God said, "Fall down from it. It is not for you to be arrogant here. Leave. You are one of the mean ones." And Tabari preserves the Arabic with precision. The word translated as bedeviled ablasa comes from a root meaning to have hope eliminated, to be cut off from any prospect of good. Iblis was not simply punished. He was transformed by the consequence of his own position. He had bet everything on a hierarchy that did not exist, and in losing that bet, he lost the capacity for the one thing that might have saved him, the ability to hope. But Iblis was not finished. He said, "Grant me respite until the day of resurrection." And God granted it. This is the moment that makes everything that follows in Tabari's history possible, and it is the moment that most demands the historic war lens, because it is not primarily a theological moment. It is a strategic one. Think about what just happened. a being who has been given the most trusted position in the lower heavens, who has governed, who has administered, who has been given authority, has just declared open rebellion against the command of the power that created him. And that power, rather than simply annihilating the rebel, grants the rebel's request for time. Why? The traditions Tabari collects do not give a single clean answer. But across the whole of Volume 1, the implication accumulates. The rebellion of Iblis is not a mistake in the divine plan. It is, and this is a difficult thought, the kind of thought that serious scholars and serious historians have to be willing to sit with. It is part of the structure. The test of the human being requires a tester. The exercise of free will requires a tempter. The meaning of obedience requires the presence of a reason to disobey. Iblis did not slip through a gap in divine sovereignty. He was granted the time he asked for by the same God who had just expelled him. What Iblis did with that grant is the engine of the entire human story. He said, and Tabari preserves this from Surah 7 of the Quran, "Because you have sent me astray, I will lie in wait for them on your straight path. I will come to them from in front and from behind, from their right and from their left." And then, in a statement that should stop every reader cold, you will not find most of them grateful. He was not wrong about the statistics. He knew the material. He had watched the clay body for 40 years. He had entered it and tested its hollowness. He had already decided what it was worth. And now, expelled from paradise, stripped of his authority, given only the span of human history to work with, he announced his strategy with the clarity of a commander who has nothing left to lose. And then God built a garden, and put Adam in it, and gave Adam a spouse, and gave them one prohibition. The creation of Eve, Hawwa, as she is named in the Arabic tradition, comes to Adam while he sleeps. The traditions Tabari gathers are consistent on the mechanics. God casts slumber upon Adam, and from one of his ribs, specifically, according to Mujahid, the lowest rib on his left side, God fashioned a woman. When Adam woke, she was there, at his head. He asked what she was. She said, "A woman." He asked why she had been created. She said, "For you to dwell with me." And Adam, in a tradition preserved through Ibn Ishaq from the people of the Torah, looked at her and said something that Tabari reports, simply and without embellishment, "My flesh and blood and spouse." And he dwelled with her. The name Hawwa Eve is explained in the traditions as deriving from the Arabic word hayy, meaning living, because she was created from a living thing. And God said to them both, "Dwell in paradise. Eat freely of its plenty wherever you wish. But do not go near this tree, or you will be wrongdoers." Everything that follows, everything, pivots on that prohibition. Not because God needed them to fail, but because the test required a limit, and Iblis had already announced he would find it. The way he found it is a story that Tabari tells with remarkable narrative detail. Iblis could not enter paradise directly. The keepers prevented him. So he went to the snake. The snake, in the tradition Tabari finds most compelling from Ibn Abbas through al-Dahak, was at that time one of the most beautiful animals in creation. Four-legged, like a Bactrian camel, brilliant and graceful. Iblis spoke to the snake and persuaded it to carry him inside paradise, hidden between two of its fangs. The keepers did not know, and from inside the snake's mouth, Iblis spoke to Eve. He said, "May I lead you to the tree of eternity and a rule that never decays?" He told her that the only reason God had forbidden the tree was to prevent them from becoming angels or living forever. And then, and Tabari's sources emphasize this detail because it matters legally and morally, he swore to them. He swore by God that he was giving them sincere advice. He used the name of God to make a false promise. He weaponized the highest form of assurance available in human speech in order to deceive. Eve ate first, and then she went to Adam. The traditions Tabari collects diverge slightly on what happened next. One tradition, preserved through Ibn Zayd, says that Eve told Adam she would not grant him what he wanted until he went to the tree with her, and when he went, she told him he could not have what he wanted until he ate from it. The sequence in that version makes Eve the active agent of Adam's decision in a specific, deliberate way. Another tradition from the same general source pool simply says that Eve ate and then found the fruit good and brought it to Adam. But on the consequence, every tradition agrees. The moment they both ate, their secret parts became apparent to them. The covering they had been given, which the traditions describe as something like the texture of fingernails, a film of luminosity over their bodies, fell away. And they were naked in a garden where they had been clothed, in a place of abundance where they had been given everything, having done the one thing they had been told not to do. They began to cover themselves with leaves. God called out, and Tabari reports this in the tradition traced to Abu Bakr B. Abdallah, "Adam, where are you?" And Adam said, "I am here, my Lord." And God said, "Will you not come out?" And Adam said, "I feel shame before you, my Lord." The shame is the first fully human emotion in Tabari's history, not hunger. Adam felt hunger the moment the spirit touched his belly. But hunger is biological. It is something animals feel. Shame is different. Shame requires self-awareness. It requires the capacity to see yourself from outside yourself, to measure what you are against what you should be. It requires, in other words, the kind of moral consciousness that makes a human being something more than an animal, but also something more capable of suffering than an animal. And then came the curses. On the snake, which lost its legs and was made to walk on its belly, with soil as its sustenance, an enemy to the children of Adam forever. On Eve, that pregnancy would be difficult, that blood would come monthly. On Adam, that the earth was where fruit had grown, that everything comfortable and given would now have to be earned. And then the expulsion. Fall down being one another's enemy. 4 beings descended from paradise to earth that day. Adam, Eve, Iblis, and the snake. And on this point, that all 4 came down, and that the conflict between them began from that moment, Tabari finds his sources consistent enough to state it clearly. Adam landed in India, on a mountain the traditions call Nud. Eve landed in Judah, what we today call Jeddah, on the Red Sea coast of Arabia. Iblis landed in a region called Mayzan. The snake landed in Isbahan, a family separated by thousands of miles at the moment of their arrival on Earth. Tabari notes, with the precision that marks everything, he writes, that Adam's descent onto the summit of Mount Nud placed his head in the lower heavens. He was 60 cubits tall, the traditions report. He could hear the prayer and praise of the angels from where he stood. He was still, in some physical sense, adjacent to what he had lost. And because that proximity made the angels uncomfortable, because a being of Adam's size, standing with his head in the heavens, made the separation between what he had been and what he now was too ambiguous, God reduced him, brought him down to 60 cubits, made him mortal-sized. And Adam heard the voices of the angels stop. Tabari does not dramatize this. He simply reports it. But the image is devastating in its simplicity. A man who had lived in the presence of divine praise, who had heard the constant sound of angels worshiping, who had been surrounded by the ambient music of a creation doing what it was made to do, and who now stood on a mountain in India, full-sized in one direction and diminished in another, listening to silence where there had been singing. He mourned. Traditions preserve that Adam and Eve wept for what they had lost, for the luxury of paradise, for the ease of it, for the abundance, for 200 years. Adam did not approach Eve for 100 years. The black stone, which Adam had brought down with him from paradise, a stone that was, in that first age, whiter than snow, absorbed his tears until it turned the color it is today. This is where the question lands, and it is a question I want you to think hard about before answering. Tabari's sources present the expulsion from paradise not as God abandoning Adam, but as God beginning the actual test that Adam was created for. The vicegerent was always meant for earth. The title itself implies governance of a place, not residence in a garden. But here is what I want to know. Does Tabari's Adam deserve your sympathy, your judgment, or both? He was warned. He was given one prohibition. He had a companion who ate first. He had an enemy who swore falsely in the name of God. And he ate. Drop your answer in the comments. I read everyone. And if you are not yet subscribed, this is the moment to do it. What happens next is the reason this channel exists. Hit subscribe so you do not miss it. God, in the traditions Tabari preserves, did not leave Adam in his grief. He sent revelation. He sent the words by which Adam could ask for forgiveness. The words preserved in the Quran. Our Lord, we have wronged ourselves. If you do not forgive us and show mercy unto us, we shall be losers. And Adam received those words, and God accepted his repentance. And God gave Adam what earth required: knowledge of the crafts, the tools of survival, the practices by which a human being can live on a planet that does not simply hand over its abundance, but must be cultivated, worked, struggled with. Gabriel came with wheat, 7 grains, each one weighing what the traditions describe as an enormous amount, representing the concentrated productivity of paradise, now requiring human labor to replicate. Gabriel brought 2 stones and iron. Adam struck them together and made fire. He was the first to make bread from grain. He was the first to plow. He was the first to harvest. He was the first to grind and knead and bake. Every act of agriculture, every act of craft, every act of turning raw material into something useful, the traditions Tabari preserves trace all of it to Adam, working on a mountain in India, teaching himself and his children how to survive in a world that did not provide what paradise had provided. And across all of that labor, across the centuries of his life on earth, for the traditions place Adam's total lifespan at 1,000 years, he was also a prophet. God revealed 21 scrolls to Adam. Gabriel taught him the hours of worship, the forms of prayer appropriate to each hour of the night and day. Adam was not simply the first human being. He was the first messenger, the first person to receive revelation and be charged with transmitting it to those around him. He transmitted it to Seth. And that transmission, the line of knowledge passing from Adam to Seth, from Seth to Enosh, from Enosh down through the generations to Enoch and Methuselah and Lamech, and finally to Noah, is the thread that holds the entire human story together in Tabari's telling. It is the thread that will be tested and nearly broken by the children of Cain, by the descent from the mountain, by the intermarriage of the two lines, by the corruption that fills the earth and finally brings down the flood. But before that, there is one more thing Tabari records about Adam that belongs here in this episode, before we move to the next generation. When Adam was approaching death, God showed him his progeny, all of them. Every human being who would ever live, extracted from his back in the form of tiny ants, white as pearls, scattered before him like a field, and among them one figure shone with a light that was different from the others. Adam asked, "Who is that?" And God said, "That is David. His life has been set at 60 years. And Adam said, "My Lord, give him more." And God said, "That is what was written." And Adam said, "I give him 40 years of mine." The pens were still wet. The record was adjusted. And then Adam forgot. When the angel of death came for Adam at the end of 960 years, 40 years before the full 1,000, Adam said, "There must be a mistake. I have 40 years left." The angel of death said, "You gave them to your son David." And Adam said, "I did not." And God had the document brought forward. The angels who had witnessed the agreement testified against him. Adam forgot, and his progeny forget. Adam denied, and his progeny deny. And on that day, Tabari's sources tell us, God established written documents and commanded the use of witnesses. Because memory is not enough, and the honest acknowledgement of a promise made requires something more durable than what we carry inside us. That is the first law in human history, not a prohibition against murder, not a commandment about worship. The first legal institution in Tabari's history is the requirement to put agreements in writing and have them witnessed, because the Father of all humanity demonstrated, at the end of his life, that even the best of intentions and the most sincere of promises can be forgotten when the moment of reckoning arrives. Adam died on a Friday. He was buried by the angels, who washed him with water and Sidr leaves and dressed him in shrouds and prepared his grave. And they said, "The traditions preserve this with a kind of solemn finality. This shall be the custom of the children of Adam after him." The first funeral in human history was performed by angels, for the man who had been carried from paradise on their watch, and every funeral since has been a repetition of that first one. He was buried in the cave of Abu Qubays, near Mecca, according to one tradition, on Mount Nud where he had landed, according to another. And when Noah came, centuries later, he carried Adam's body in a coffin through the flood, protecting it, and returned it to its place when the waters receded. A man who had been made by God's own hands, who had heard the angels pray, who had eaten from paradise, who had stood with his head in the heavens, buried in the earth from which he came, by the beings who had prostrated before him, mourned by a lineage that was already beginning to fracture along the fault lines that would eventually require a flood to reset. This is where part 2 ends, with Adam in the ground, with Seth, his legatee, holding the scrolls of Revelation, with the children of Cain already moving into the lowlands, already building fires and playing music, and intermarrying with the children of Seth who came down from the mountain to look at them, with Iblis somewhere in all of it, doing exactly what he promised he would do. The next episode will take us to that fracture. Cain and Abel, the first murder, the raven that taught Cain how to bury what he had done, the line of Seth and the line of Cain diverging across centuries until the earth was filled with what the angels had warned about in the beginning, corruption and bloodshed. And God looked at what humanity had done with its 1,000 years and decided it was time for water. If you want to understand why the flood happens, why it is not simply a punishment, but a resetting of a specific kind of civilizational failure, watch this episode and the previous one before part 3 drops. They are linked on your screen and in the description. The thread runs from the pen to the flood, and if you miss any part of it, the arc won't land the way it should. If you have not subscribed yet, do it now. And if this episode gave you something, if Tabari's Adam landed differently than any version of this story you have heard before, share it. One share from you puts this history in front of someone who has never heard it told this way. This is the House of Wisdom, where history is never just the past.